Right, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are continuing our discussion of the Orientalist. Today we're going to be having a look at Dr. John Burton. One of the books he wrote that was very influential is the book that is called The Collection of the Quran. It was first published in 1977 by the Cambridge University Press. He applied the theories of Orientalists that preceded him. Most noteworthy was Schacht, and he has the following, or rather some critical writers had the following to say regarding him, that he seeks to reopen the question of the collection of the Quran as seen by the Muslims. The accounts will be re-examined in light of the studies by Goldziher and Schacht. Right, so the Islamic narrative of how the Quran was collected, he now indicates that it is a thing that should be drawn into doubt, and he's going to base his findings on what others have written before him, but he's going to be adding to that. Either way, the aim is to indicate that what Muslims have told you regarding the collection of the Quran, that is not the truth. In fact, he came up with the idea that there is no true Uthmanic script of the Quran. Those changes had actually occurred during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Now, these are all things that I'm going to be addressing in detail, inshallah, in future lessons. I do, however, just want to indicate to a few principles that he threw out, and Allah knows best. Like, for example, he says in his book, The Collection of the Quran, one must either accept all hadith impartially, but uncritical trust, or one must regard each and every hadith as at least potentially guilty of a greater or lesser degree of inherent bias. Right? So he speaks of hadith while we are speaking of Quran. So you could be saying to yourself that it is unrelated to the current discussion. Here there are two things that I need you to know. Number one is the principle that he introduces is a principle that applies to the Quran and to the Hadith equally. Then also number two, when we make tafsir of the Quran, the best and highest form of tafsir of the Quran is the Quran giving tafsir of the Quran, and then the Hadith giving tafsir of the Quran. So any statement regarding Hadith, if not directly regarding the Quran, it will indirectly affect the authenticity and our understanding of the Quran. Either way, notice what he's telling you. He's telling you that you must either have an uncritical trust of all of Hadith, right? And I'm indicating also of all of Quran. Or you must regard every Hadith as having a potential of some type of a bias or the other, right? This is his opinion, right? What has been the Islamic approach? So in Islam, scholars, whether they looked at the Quran or whether they looked at Hadith, the issue was what are the chances of error creeping into the Quran or creeping into Hadith? Then initially, the simple response would be, there's always the possibility of intentional error, where a narrator is actually a liar, he intentionally lies for whatever reason, or there would be the possibility of unintentional error. So with intentional error, the narrator is a crook of sorts, right? And with unintentional error, the narrator is not a crook of sorts, but perhaps his memory is weak, and Allah knows best. Now, with regards to the Quran has been narrated too profusely for any possibility of both unintentional and intentional error. It is narrated by too many people. In fact, when we think of sanad studies, which is a study of the chain of authorities, the Quran actually needs no particular sanad study, though there are numerous sanads. Ulama, when they speak of the narration of the Quran, that the Quran being passed from one generation to the next, as I've said in a previous setting, it is actually the narration of a jil, an entire generation to an entire generation, and not a limited amount of asanid. So this introduces the concept of the mutawatir and the akhbar ahad. Mutawatir means something is narrated so profusely there is no potential of error, whether intentionally or unintentionally. So I'm assuming that you have been doing mustalah al-hadith, and these concepts have been introduced to you over there. If not, I will give a brief indication to that just now, inshallah. But either way, Muslims have not been uncritical in the appraisal of any source of Islam, whether it be the Quran or whether it be Hadith. Yes, there was a difference in the approach to the Quran as opposed to the Hadith as a whole, due to differences in how the Quran was transmitted to us and what the Quran basically deals with. In principle, it is because all of the Quran is mutawatir, while all of the Hadith is not mutawatir. Some of the Hadith is mutawatir, narrated so profusely that it is definitively authentic. And some, and this is the vast majority, it does not fall into that category. At best, it produces probabilistic knowledge. So yes, Muslims have been much more critical of Hadith than what they have been of Quran, but it is not for lack of a critical approach, right? Then, after having decided or come to the realization that we need to approach these things critically, we have indicated to ourselves as Muslims that there's always the potential of intentional error and unintentional error. So what is there in Islam that will protect us against this? And Allah knows best. Now, before I continue, when you are dealing with probabilistic knowledge, how would you approach it? How would you know that this is probably authentic as opposed to it is probably inauthentic, right? So to me, the basis of this entire discussion comes from Surah Qasas, verse 26. Surah Qasas, verse 26. There are other verses and there are other ahadith. But in Surah Qasas, we have the story of Nabi Musa. He met two ladies that he assisted to water the animals, and then they took him to his father, to their father, Nabi Shu'aib. And then they advised the father, Daddy, you need to hire this man, Daddy. You need to hire this man. So one of them said, قالت, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم, قالت, she said, إحداهما, one of them, Ya abati, oh my beloved father. Normally, my father would just be Ya abi, but she goes Ya abati. Right? So it's a term of endearment. So I could add up to it, beloved or dear father. Right? Oh my dear father. Istajirhu, hire him. So from the word ajr, right, which mean to turn a person into an ajir, somebody that is hired. If you put it in the scale of istaf'ala, it becomes istajara, right? So istajara, yastajiru, and then the amr would be istajir. So that's what's happening over here. So, oh beloved father, oh dear father, istajirhu, hire him. And here's a very golden principle, which is a principle that I'm applying all over the place. Inna khayra man istajarta, the best person for you to hire is al-qawiyyu, the powerful, the capable, one who's able to do the job. And al-aminu, the trustworthy, one who can be trusted to do the job. Al-qawiyyu, one who's able to do the job, and al-aminu, one that can be trusted to do the job. And this is a principle that you can apply in all aspects of your life. Like, for example, when you want to get married, then why are you marrying this particular man? Why are you marrying this particular woman? Right? So if, for example, you're a lady and you want to marry a particular man, and one of your aims in marriage is that you want emotional intimacy. You want to be able to achieve a certain degree of emotional intimacy. Then the thing you have to ask yourself is, number one, is this man qawi? Is he capable of attaining to the level of emotional intimacy that I seek in a marriage? And then number two, al-aminu, can he be trusted to do so? Can he be trusted to do so? You understand? Is he willing to do so? Willing and capable. These are the two most important things that you can apply anywhere in your life. Now, when it comes to the sources of Sharia, the business that we are in is the business of sidq, of truthfulness. to figure out. Right? Now, before I give you the exact slide for that, so the idea is any amal, any type of a work, any type of an action, we need two things. We need, number one, the person to be amin, so he must possess amana. Right? And amana is willingness to do the job. Can we trust the person to do the job? Then the person must be qawi, so they must possess quwwa, so they must possess the ability to do the job. Right? Amana and quwwa. Right? In the business of the sources of Sharia, the thing, the amal is sidq. Right? Are they speaking the truth? What is the definition of sidq in Islam? It is al-qawl al-muwafiq lil-waqi', a statement that accords with reality. Al-qawl al-muwafiq lil-waqi', a statement that accords with reality. So is the statement that this person is making, whether in the narration of the Quran or the narration of the Hadith, are they giving us statements that is in accordance with reality? So we have to look for amana and we have to look for quwwa. When it comes to true statements, amana translates as adala. Right? Adala is integrity. Do they possess integrity where they will not lie? And if you look at what I said before, errors are either intentional or unintentional. So adala is where we are trying to protect against intentional error. We are trying to protect against intentional error. So in the science of Mustalah al-Hadith, Hadith classification and methodology, which is the Muslim critical approach to Hadith, Adala means, number one, the person must be a Muslim, because we cannot trust non-Muslims to tell us the truth about Islam. That's technically the competition. You understand? So the competition is not going to tell you the truth of the product of another. In today's, what do you call it, political arena, when we are dealing with democracy, and especially the most current form of democracy known as opposition politics. Right? If I take America, for example, we have the Democrats and we have the Republicans. You cannot expect a Democrat to tell you the truth about the Republicans. The bulk of them will never. You understand? And the same thing the other way around. The law over there is whatever a Democrat is saying, if you are a Republican, is a lie, and you must say the opposite. And whatever a Republican is saying, if you're a Democrat, is a lie, and you must say the opposite. We see the same thing in South Africa frequently with Malema. If Ramaphosa says the schools must be closed, and then he fights for education of the youth. If Ramaphosa says the schools must be opened, then he indicates, but you are putting our children's lives at risk. Doesn't matter what Ramaphosa says, he will just automatically say the opposite. So opposition politics, opposition democracy. You understand? Either way, so for integrity, the person must be Muslim. Then the person must be aqil, sane. You cannot expect mad people, insane people to tell us the truth. Frequently you ask an insane man, who are you? He tells you, I'm Napoleon Bonaparte. So he doesn't even know who he is. How can we expect him to know the truth about the Quran or about Hadith? Then number three, the person needs to be baligh. They need to be baligh. The person needs to be an adult when they convey the Hadith. And the Muslim reason, the reason Islamic scholars came up was a person needing to be an adult when they convey the Hadith to others. Though it's fine if they got the Hadith when they weren't adults. Right? But at the point of conveyance, they need to be adults. And the fear over there was, if you're not an adult, according to Islamic law, you're ghair baligh, then even when you commit a sin, it doesn't register as a sin. And so we cannot trust such an individual. An individual who sins, but it doesn't register as a sin. Right? So we need this individual to know that if you fabricate hadith, then there will be divine retribution. So Muslim aqil baligh. Salim min fisq. The person must be a person that is also free from any type of a major sin against Allah or persistence in minor sins. So the person must be moral. Aw mukhillin bil muru'a. The person must also be free from anything that according to the custom of the people would make that person an immoral person, and Allah knows best. Here there was the understanding among scholars, and if a person is able to go up against the custom of the person's nation for no good reason, then for them to go up against a religion would even be even more probable. Either way, there was a method to determine integrity. There were those 5 things that were studied by the ulama. Obviously, there's more detail in that. This is not the time to discuss it, right? So why was that? To protect against intentional error. Basically, a person intentionally lying, saying something that is contrary to the truth. Then on the opposite side, we have to determine now these narrators, after determining their integrity, their willingness to tell the truth, we have to now determine, do they possess the necessary power? So in Arabic, that is known as dabt. When you speak of any report, then that is known as dabt, which translates loosely as accuracy. Right? So narrators have to be dabit, they have to be accurate individuals. Right? So this is the question here would now be, how accurately have they remembered things, and how accurately are they able to give it over? And the general law was they have to narrate things and not add anything, and they needed to not subtract anything. Here there was a big debate. Did they have to narrate things exactly as they were told by the Prophet ﷺ, word for word, or could they paraphrase? Right? So that's the issue of riwayah bil ma'na. And in principle, the idea of riwayah bil ma'na was accepted among scholars, paraphrasal, on condition that the person was very good at the Arabic language, and the person engaged mostly in only in the use of synonyms and the like, and Allah knows best. Either way, it was an issue of accuracy and integrity. How did the scholars study the integrity of an individual? So that could be done directly by studying the lifestyle of the individual and reports as to details of the lifestyle. How do you study the accuracy of an individual? So here, what Muslim scholars did is they would take the narrations of that individual and they would compare it with other narrators. So other narrators that were already determined to be dabit, accurate individuals, they would take this person's narration and compare it with their narrations. If their narrations were of a certain quality, then they would be considered to be dabit, accurate. If it fell below a certain level, they would say that they are not accurate in their narration, and then automatically whatever they narrate would be considered inauthentic. Was it possible for a narrator that was accurate to sometimes err? Yes, that there was a possibility, and it is a thing that sometimes happened. But via comparison with other reports or other versions of the same report by other narrators, scholars were able to determine exactly now when was a scholar or a narrator of a hadith accurate or not. Either way, what is the main thrust that I want to indicate to you over here? There's somehow the suggestion that Muslims have been entirely uncritical, right? And then there's the suggestion that if you have to have a critical approach, you have to think of the narrators as biased, right? So you have to basically impinge their character. So this is not what Muslims have done. Muslims have just indicated that number one, there might be an integrity problem, and number two, there might be a memory problem, right? So let's now study this individual, right? Does this individual possess an integrity problem, yes or no? If the answer is no, then we move on to the next one. What is the accuracy of the narrator like? And Allah knows best. Now, we Muslims are the only people when it comes to our religion that we have asanid, chains of authorities. This is the reason why also, and I don't know if it has been mentioned in other classes, that scholars, Quran number one, most authentic, no potential of error. Hadith, depending on what type of hadith. Right? Is the hadith mutawatir? Then it's equivalent to the Quran in power, in authenticity. If is the hadith akhbar ahad, narration of individuals, then over there are possibilities, but based upon the laws of probability and these measures, we are able to determine now, did the Prophet probably say this, or is it improbable that he said it? And those two statements, there's lots of laws that come from that. You understand? It will be discussed in other classes and in my class further on, inshallah. Either way, what we are sitting with is, you would then automatically have a hadith that are registered as authentic and a hadith that are registered as inauthentic. There was absolutely, Muslims have never been uncritical in their approach to the sources of Islam. There is no religion that has studied its texts more than the Muslims throughout the ages. It is just that they did it in a very scientific manner. You understand? And it wasn't an issue of just automatically coming to assumptions that these people don't possess integrity, these people are biased in favor of Islam, so they will just say anything that will support Islam. No. The issue was, let's research the individual. Let's see what type of an individual he really is, right? And it always went as amana and quwwah, right? Is this person amin? Can they be trusted to speak the truth? And is this person qawi? Do they possess the necessary ability to speak the truth? And Allah knows best, right? So as a result, the basis of criticism of the sources in Islam has been more to do with authority, that is the narrator now, and the source, which is again the narrator. Was there textual criticism in Islam? Yes, but very limited. It was limited to comparisons of text, and also, for example, the Arabic that was used. The Prophet ﷺ was known to be a very eloquent individual, not a poet. You understand? The Prophet, the evidence actually indicates that the Prophet ﷺ was very weak at poetry, and that is in accordance with divine wisdom. You understand? It makes the Quran even greater. If somebody had great poetic ability, and then afterwards that person were to produce the Quran, then you could argue, no, he was always a poet. So to have produced a poetic text such as the Quran, that's obvious. You understand? And this is the reason also why Allah goes out of his way to indicate that the Prophet ﷺ is not a poet. And the Quran isn't poetry. There might be a rhyme scheme, there might be a certain level of beauty of expression, you understand, and Allah knows best, but that doesn't automatically make it poetry. So criticism, historically, if people had solid source criticism and authority criticism, they didn't need much textual criticism, right? Then also you sit with a problem that textual criticism is arbitrary by nature. It's arbitrary by nature. It involves a lot of how do I feel about this text, right? Like with the Bible, for example, there are certain verses of the Bible where they don't clearly know who the author is. They do not even have a sanad that says that Matthew said like this. But rather what they do is they found it in text that supposedly was biblical text. Now they have to decide who probably said it. And after studying Matthew and getting a feel for Matthew and knowing how Matthew spoke, they would now say that this sounds like Matthew. Doesn't sound like John, because John tended to speak like this, and it doesn't sound like Luke, because Luke tended to speak like that. This sounds more like Matthew. So let's take this verse and put it in the Bible in the chapter known as Matthew. Now that as I've said, it contains a certain arbitrariness. You understand? While what source criticism and authority criticism, that my authority is telling me that this should go into that chapter. You understand? This should be verse such and such of that particular, what do you call this, surah, for example. And then the question is this, how many of them are saying this? And when we apply the laws of Adala and Dabt, you understand, what do we find? Are they suitable narrators, yes or no? We also sit with a problem with that, right? And just to take it a slightly higher level, is that one of the laws of modernists and people that have sought to reform religion, as if religion needed to be reformed, is they've moved away from the specifics to the generalities. And here's a little phrase that I like to say that sums this up very nicely. In the English language, they have the saying, the devil lies in the details. The devil lies in the details. If you want to fit in what modern societies more and more, though you still want to call yourself a Muslim, if you want to say things and do things that are politically correct, yet you still want to call yourself a Muslim, how would you be able to do that? So the method is that you must move away from the details of Quran and Hadith, and you must rather focus on the generalities of Quran and Hadith. Like, for example, justice. Who that is a moral person would deny the concept known as justice? Right? So if I'm a Muslim and I'm speaking to a Jew, or I'm speaking to a Christian, or even somebody that doesn't follow any religion, but looks upon himself or herself as a moralist, and we speak about justice, the reality is that all four of us will agree. There will be no dispute. If I as a Muslim, however, were to go into the details of justice, that the Quran says that if you steal, your hand must be cut. Asariqu wasariqatu faqta'u aydiyahuma. The male thief and the female thief, when they steal, cut their hand. Now suddenly the Jew would disagree, the Christian would disagree, that other moralist would disagree. So where is the devil? The devil is not in the generalities. The devil is in the details, in the specifics. We can all agree on generalities, but when it comes to the specifics, that is where disagreement come about. Same thing with modesty. All of us would agree, modesty is a good thing. I would say so. The Jew would say so. The Christian would say so. The moralist that is not following any religion, he would say so. Right? But then I would say chastity, modesty, involves avoidance of zina. You understand? If you look at it at a married level, adultery. Then the moralists would say, yes, but the reason adultery is a bad thing is because your husband and wife will be negatively affected. Emotionally, they will be harmed. But what if he or she gives me permission to sleep around? Maybe with conditions, but still they give me permission to do so. Isn't that still morally acceptable? Am I not still being chaste to my wife or my husband as long as I fulfill their conditions? Like I've read that one woman gave her husband permission, you can sleep around, no problem, but you're not allowed to kiss anybody. You can do everything you want to, but don't kiss anybody. So according to number 4 here, the moralist that doesn't follow religion, he feels that is still chastity, and he feels that is still modesty. You understand? Perhaps all his wife has required of him is he mustn't kiss anybody and he must hide it. It mustn't become public knowledge. So he's done that. So according to him, that is modesty, and according to him, that is chastity. Now, by the Islamic understanding of all of these things, that can never be regarded as modesty. That can never be regarded as chastity. Again, the devil is in the details. Right? So, if we have a textual criticism, I'm going to say it again, there's a certain degree of arbitrariness. Right? So, if, for example, I'm reading the Quran, and the Quran is telling me, right from the beginning, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, Ar-Rahman, the infinitely merciful, Ar-Rahim, the eternally compassionate. Right? So automatically I understand, especially because every surah, with the exception of Surah Tawbah, begins with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And throughout the Quran, Allah is conveying the message that He is extremely compassionate. He is the most compassionate being in existence. So I now focus on this generality. And then I'm reading a verse that says, you must cut hands. You understand? So now the two are in conflict in my mind. The generality of Allah being merciful and the specificness of Allah saying that if a person steals, the hand must be cut. So if I overfocus on this generality, I can start saying, maybe that is the law that applied in Medina at that time. That was the only way to get criminals to stop stealing. Right? But in modern times, we've got different ways of doing it. So for this particular reason, we no longer apply this ayah. You understand? So this has generally been the way of supposed reformers of the Quran, of supposed reformers of Islam. And I've explained this in a different way to you in the past. Right? Let's just quickly go over that. We've got limited time and see how far we get. Let's imagine a woman was married to a man. Then he died. Then there was a doctor, let's call him Frankenstein. And this doctor somehow was able to bring her husband back from the death, from the dead. So now she's living with a man that is a half zombie. Right? It's very different to what he was before when he was fully alive. Right? And she's very unhappy with him. So how do we solve this problem? So the modernists have a manner of solving the problem, And the traditional ulama have a manner of solving this problem. So the modernist way of solving the problem is that they are going to change the law of Allah now. You understand? They're going to say, right, your husband is a zombie, and the treatment is giving you is unsuitable treatment. So the normal laws of Islam cannot apply. We must introduce a new set of laws to solve the zombie problem. So that is the modernist approach, and the enemy of Islam, that is their approach. What is the traditional Muslim or the traditional scholars approach? The traditional scholars approach is this. This individual is a zombie. You understand? And he needs to go back to the grave. Leave the law of Islam as it is, but take this individual and take this individual back to the grave. That is how we solve the problem. Right? Now, this is an overall theory. Let me give you a practical example. So women in Islam, men are responsible for them. Right? If you're unmarried, then your father is responsible for you. When you get married, financially now, when you get married, then your husband is financially responsible for you. Right? If you got no husband, you got no father, then brothers, for example, are responsible for you. And it continues like that, even uncles. Now, what if I'm a Muslim woman and I want my brothers to assist me financially so that the basics are there, but they're not doing it? How do we solve this problem? So a modernist, what a modernist is going to say? A modernist is going to say, the reason Islam has men inheriting more is because men assume financial responsibility. So brothers inherit more than sisters in the Quran because based on Islamic law and in the past, they were financially responsible for sisters. We now live in a time where brothers no longer assume financial responsibility for sisters, so we can no longer apply this ayah. This ayah that says that brothers inherit more than sisters, we can no longer apply this ayah. So from this point forward, brothers and sisters will inherit the same. So they are very quick to change the law of Allah. They jump, you understand, and they rush. What is the style of the traditional scholar? The style of the traditional scholar is, this brother, what they are doing is wrong. This is a dhulm upon their sister. And we need to now put in place laws that will ensure that brothers fulfill their responsibilities to their sisters, as is written in Quran and written in Hadith. So if you have very little source criticism, you will move over to textual criticism. If you have a lot of source criticism, then you will avoid textual criticism except where absolutely needed. And this has been the major difference between Islamic criticism of their sources and the criticism that Christianity and Judaism have of their sources. They don't sit with solid sanads. You understand? And so they've gone deeper into textual criticism, right? To supposedly have a critical attitude towards text. But the dangers over there are great. While the dangers in source criticism and authoritative criticism are much less, especially if it is done in a very scientific manner, and Allah knows best. Either way, my time is basically up, and I'm waiting for Mullah Khalil to come, so I'm going to continue, inshallah. John Burton goes further, page 234 in the book, The Collection of the Quran. He says, we cannot in our arrogance continue to presume that guided by mere literal intuition, we can safely pick our way, selecting or rejecting hadiths. So that statement there, guided by mere literary intuition, is actually confirming to you that the textual criticism is faulty. It doesn't work well, right? So now we would assume that he's going to say that the Sanad approach of the Muslims, that is what is going to work. But amazingly, he doesn't do that. You understand? What he rather does is he rejects all hadith regarding the compilation of the Quran. And then he just comes up with his own bizarre history of the collection, which basically means that the Quran was fully collected even in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. There is no Uthmanic script. There is no Uthmanic collection. It was always the Rasulic collection and the Rasulic script. And Allah knows best, something that nobody else has ever said before. Does he have evidence for what he has to say? No, he doesn't. Rather, what he does is, he in a very opportunistic manner, he now takes the concept of naskh, of abrogation of the Quran, and it just goes to town with that. Now, abrogation is a thing that we haven't done yet, and we need to get into that. This is the main ayah regarding abrogation, and we're going to be having a look at that. But due to limitations of time, I just want to quickly say what John Burton had said. So he says the following. Amid his manifold state responsibilities, Muhammad could not always remember the precise wording in which he had given out certain revelations. So because the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was now the leader of a state, right? Yeah, similar to being a prime minister or a president, etc. And prime minister and presidents in today's time, they're very busy. So he just goes ahead and he assumes that the Prophet ﷺ was also very busy, right? And then he goes further and he assumes the reason for naskh, for abrogation in the Quran, was because the Prophet ﷺ couldn't remember well what he had told people before. And Allah knows best. If the Prophet ﷺ had faulted in his narrative of the Quran, then that's a thing that would have been noticed in the time of the Sahaba anhum. And if not the time of the Sahaba anhum, in the time of the Tabi'un. We would have had cases where people rectified the Prophet of Allah. No, it isn't like this. When he told us before, it was like that. You understand? We have no such thing. There's no such thing, absolutely not. You understand? So this man is just letting his imagination run wild. So he goes on and he says, this is how the different companions received their slightly different versions. Although all words are received directly from the Prophet himself, obviously as a Muslim, I will say peace be upon him. Right? Now we've discussed this before. We've indicated, and we need to go deeper into that all that happened over there was dialectical differences. And sometimes the swapping of certain synonyms that was revealed onto the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon himself, to accommodate the various Arabs, right? So that they would know exactly what is the Quran telling them. So it was the difference between Malik, which means owner, and Malik. Right? If I just quickly go back, right, in the limited time that we have, these are some of the differences that they tell us they have found. Right? Now, it's not similar to differences that is appearing in the in the Bible. In the Bible, we have huge number differences, like 1,000 as opposed to 10,000. There's a whole difference of 9,000. Right? In the Bible, in the Old Testament, we have God saying there is one God and He's a jealous God. Then apparently, according to them, in the New Testament, suddenly God is three. We're having all those differences, huge differences in creed and in practice. But the best they can bring regarding the Quran is that in Surah Fatiha, for example, one qira'ah is saying Malik, and another qira'ah is saying Malik. And Malik means king or monarch or sovereign, and Malik means owner. What have the Mufassirun responded? The Mufassirun have responded that both those meanings are the meanings that Allah wants to convey. Allah wants to convey that He's both the sovereign and the owner of everything in existence other than Himself. You understand? There's no true major meaning difference between the one and the other, and the meanings are actually supportive of one another. Right? Then they give us another example. Right? The common reading is Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim. And another reading says Arshidna Sirat al-Mustaqim. So what's the difference between Ihdina and Arshidna? So if I didn't know Arabic, I would think this is a major difference. Ihdina, I mean Ihdina. And Arshidna is clearly two different words. But if I ask you who knows Arabic, translate Ihdina. So Hadaya Hadi, Hidayah, to guide. Arshada Yurshidu Irshad, also to guide. Right? They both mean the same thing. Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim, guide us to the straight path. Arshidna Sirat al-Mustaqim, guide us to the straight path. Right? Another difference they bring in Surah Fatiha. Sirat al-ladhina an'amta alayhim. And another qira'at is Sirata man an'amta alayhim. So what's the difference between the two? Again, to me that doesn't know Arabic, it is a big difference. It's alladhina and man. It's a big difference. But now we ask you, what is the meaning of alladhina? And alladhina means those. And what does man mean? Man means who and whose and also those. So translate Sirat alladhina an'amta alayhim, the path of those whom you have favored. Translate Sirata man an'amta alayhim, the path of those whom you have favored. It's saying exactly the same thing. There's no difference between the one and the other, and Allah knows best. Mullah Khalil is here, so I will end there inshallah, and we will continue next week. Maulana, let me just make you the host quickly. Let me just find you. Okay, there you are.